Hello everyone. In today's video, get ready for a story that will move you. I'm going to share the remarkable account of Calder Halloway, an ordinary man who, after a near-death experience, received an urgent message about the future of humanity. The visions he had will challenge your beliefs and might change the way you see the world forever. So, before we dive into this breathtaking journey, be sure to leave your like, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any incredible content like this, and hit the notification bell to receive all the updates. Now, get comfortable and prepare yourself, because what you're about to hear may deeply impact you. Let's begin. My name is Calder Halloway. I'm 37 years old, and I'm about to share with you an experience that completely changed my perception of life and death. Before all of this happened, I was just another office worker, stuck in the daily grind for 7 long years. Life felt like an endless cycle of work, stress, and exhaustion. I always had a vague curiosity about spiritual matters, but I never dedicated much time to exploring them. After all, I was too busy just trying to survive in the corporate world. I lived an ordinary life, with its ups and downs like everyone else. I had a few hobbies to distract myself. I occasionally liked to ride motorcycles and was trying to write a book in my spare time. Nothing extraordinary, right? Little did I know, I was about to embark on the most incredible and transformative journey of my existence. It's funny how life can change in an instant. One moment you're worried about deadlines and meetings, and the next you're facing issues far bigger than any worldly problem. That's exactly what happened to me on what seemed like just another ordinary Thursday. Looking back now, I realize that every detail of that day was significant. Every little decision, every seemingly random move, all conspired to place me exactly where I needed to be. Not that I believed in destiny at that time, but after what I experienced, I began to see patterns and connections in places that once seemed like mere coincidences. I'm here to tell my story not because I want to convince anyone of anything, but because I feel it's important to share. What I experienced goes beyond religious beliefs or scientific theories. It's something that touched the core of my being and completely redefined my understanding of life, death, and everything that exists between these two states. So, get ready. The journey I'm about to narrate may challenge your beliefs, shake your certainties, and perhaps open your eyes to a reality far beyond what our physical senses can perceive. It's a story of loss, discovery, fear, and a profound peace I never imagined possible. It all started on what seemed like an ordinary Thursday. 3 clients canceled their appointments at the office, leaving me with some unexpected free time. I decided to use it to take care of a few personal matters, get some medical exams, and work a little on the book I was writing. Without thinking much, I grabbed my Harley and headed out. It was at that moment that something unusual happened. For the first time in 7 years, as I left the office parking lot, I turned right instead of left. A simple, almost unconscious decision, but one that would change the course of my life forever. I was making a left turn at a traffic light when everything happened. There was no warning, no time to react. One moment I was there, riding my motorcycle, thinking about how to spend my free day. In the next moment, I felt an overwhelming force hit me. An SUV had collided with me head-on. The impact was brutal. I remember a brief moment of shock, a flash of intense pain, and then nothing. The world around me simply disappeared. There was no more street, no cars, no deafening sound of the crash. All that existed was an immense and silent void. At that moment, I didn't know it, but my physical life had come to an end. My body lay on the asphalt, surrounded by panicked people, sirens wailing in the distance. But I, the essence of who I was no longer there. The transition was so fast that it took me a few moments to realize what had happened. I felt no fear, no pain. It was as if all the worries and anxieties of earthly life had been removed from me in a single stroke. I was at peace. I floated in a space that wasn't exactly a place, but a state of being. It was as if my consciousness had been freed from the limitations of the physical body. I could perceive everything around me with surprising clarity, but not through the usual senses. It was a completely new and indescribable form of perception. Gradually, I began to understand that something extraordinary was happening. I had left my body behind, but I still existed. I was still myself, with my thoughts and memories intact, but at the same time I felt larger, more complete. That's when I realized I had died, or at least that's what it seemed. But if this was death, why did I feel so alive? Why, instead of darkness and an ending, was I experiencing an expansion of consciousness that I never imagined possible? As these questions surfaced in my mind, I felt a presence. It wasn't something I could see or hear in the conventional sense, but something I simply knew was there. And with this presence came an understanding. My journey was just beginning. The transition to the other side was instantaneous and surprisingly serene. There were no tunnels of light or angels playing harps, as I had often heard in near-death experience stories. Instead, I found myself enveloped in a deep peace and a welcoming silence. It was as if I had been transported to a place beyond time and space. There were no longer the physical limitations I was used to. I could move with the simple power of thought, crossing what seemed to be a vast field of pure energy. Around me, I sensed other presences. They weren't exactly forms or bodies as we know them, but distinct consciousnesses that I could feel. Some seemed familiar, like old friends I hadn't seen in a long time. Others were completely unknown, but equally welcoming. As I adapted to this new state of being, I began to realize that I could access information and memories far beyond my current life. It was as if all the knowledge of the universe was within my reach, merely waiting for me to desire to access it. At that moment, I had a profound understanding that death, as we know it, is just an illusion. What we experience as the end of life is, in fact, a transition to a much broader and richer state of existence. As I absorbed these revelations, I felt a sort of calling. It wasn't words or sounds, but an irresistible pull guiding me toward what I can only describe as a portal. It was as if every part of my being knew that this was where I was meant to go. As I approached this portal, the sensations intensified. The peace I had felt from the beginning deepened even further, and I was overwhelmed by a feeling of unconditional love so intense that it nearly overtook me. That's when I realized this love wasn't something external to me, but an integral part of my being. It was as if, for the first time, I was experiencing my true essence, free from the limitations and fears that had accompanied me in earthly life. As I passed through the portal, I was bathed in a light that didn't blind, but illuminated. Every particle of my being vibrated in harmony with this light, and I felt completely at home. It was at this moment that I understood. I had returned to my true origin. The concerns of the life I had left behind seemed so distant and insignificant now. All the problems, the anxieties, the fears that had once consumed me, simply dissolved in the face of this new reality. However, even amidst all this peace and understanding, a part of me was still aware of the world I had left behind. Somehow, I could feel what was happening to my physical body. I knew that I was being resuscitated, that people were fighting to keep me alive, but honestly, at that moment, I didn't care. The fullness and freedom I was experiencing were so absolute that the idea of returning to earthly life didn't even cross my mind. I was home, finally home, and I had no desire to leave. As I adapted to this new state of being, I realized I wasn't alone. I was approached by entities that I cannot describe in physical terms. They were luminous presences, wise beings, emanating a love and understanding that transcended anything I had ever experienced. These entities, which I came to call Akashic agents, did not communicate through words. Instead, they transmitted knowledge and understanding directly to my consciousness. It was a form of communication so pure and direct that it made our language seem primitive in comparison. The Akashic agents showed me that they were guardians of universal wisdom. a vast repository of knowledge encompassing the entire history of the cosmos and beyond. They made me understand that every soul has access to this knowledge, but in earthly life, we forget about this connection. Through them, I began to see images and scenes of humanity's future. They weren't fixed predictions but possibilities based on the collective choices we would make. I saw moments of great challenge, natural disasters, conflicts among nations, but I also saw moments of incredible beauty, surprising advancements, and global unity. The agents showed me that humanity was approaching a crucial point in its spiritual evolution. Each individual would be called to make choices that would determine not only their own destiny, but the collective destiny of the entire species. I was introduced to the concept of the Akashic Records, a kind of cosmic library that contains all the information about every soul that has ever existed, exists, or will exist. I saw that every action, every thought, every choice we make is recorded in this universal field of information. The agents allowed me to access parts of my own Akashic records. It was an overwhelming experience. I saw past lives, understood patterns that repeated over several incarnations, and grasped the purpose behind many of the challenges I had faced in my current life. But the most impressive thing was realizing how everything was interconnected. Every life, every choice, every experience was part of a grand cosmic tapestry, where each thread played a fundamental role in the final design. The Akashic agents showed me that the fundamental purpose of our existence is spiritual growth. Every challenge, every pain, every joy we experience in earthly life serves this higher purpose. I was flooded with a deep understanding of concepts like karma, free will, and the cyclical nature of existence. I saw that we are not victims of chance but active co-creators of our reality. As I absorbed all this knowledge, I felt myself expand. It was as if each new understanding made me grow, not in physical size but in consciousness. I realized that what we call self is much greater and vaster than we ever imagined in our earthly existence. The Akashic agents made me understand that this experience, this glimpse of the other side, was not an accident. It was part of my own life plan, an opportunity to reconnect with my true essence and purpose. As time passed, although time is an inadequate concept to describe the experience in that state, I felt I was being prepared for something. The agents were providing me with information and insights that would be crucial not only for me, but for many others. That's when I understood. My journey wasn't over. There was a purpose behind all of this, a mission I would need to fulfill when and if I returned to earthly life. During my stay in the portal, as I came to call that place beyond physical life, the Akashic agents provided me with visions of humanity's future. They weren't fixed or inevitable predictions, but possibilities based on the collective choices we would make in the coming years. I saw a world in transformation, natural disasters on an unprecedented scale, devastating hurricanes, earthquakes that reshaped continents, climate changes that forced mass migrations. But I also saw how these adversities united people, leading them to overcome cultural and national differences for the sake of collective survival. I witnessed surprising technological advancements, machines capable of curing diseases once considered incurable, sources of clean and unlimited energy, and even humanity's first steps beyond our solar system. However, I also saw the dangers of this technological evolution, the growing dependence on machines, the loss of basic human skills, and the risk of totalitarian control facilitated by technology. The vision showed me intense conflicts between nations and ideologies, wars that threatened to destroy everything we knew. But I also saw how these same wars led people to deeply question the meaning of violence and seek higher ways of resolving conflicts. One of the most impactful visions was that of a great spiritual awakening. I saw millions of people around the world beginning to question the deeper meaning of existence, traditional religions being challenged, new forms of spirituality emerging, a collective search for a more direct connection with the divine. In these visions, I realized that humanity was approaching a crucial point of choice. Each individual would be called to decide, continue on the path of materialism and selfishness, or embrace a higher consciousness based on love and the understanding of the unity of all things. The Akashic agents showed me that this moment of choice would not be easy. Many would feel lost, confused, scared by the rapid and intense changes. I saw people desperately clinging to old beliefs and ways of life, resisting the flow of evolution. But I also saw hope. I saw communities forming, people coming together to support one another during these turbulent times. I saw the emergence of inspiring leaders, not traditional politicians, but ordinary people who rose to guide others with compassion and wisdom. One of the most powerful visions was of a change in the way humanity related to the planet. I saw a return to more sustainable practices, a renewed respect for nature and all forms of life. Every action, no matter how small, would contribute to the reality we would create. I was overcome with a sense of urgency. I realized that if I returned to physical life, I would have the responsibility to share these visions, to help people prepare for the challenges and opportunities that lay ahead. At the same time, I felt a deep humility. Who was I to carry such an important message? How could I translate such transcendent experiences into words? That's when the Akashic agents transmitted one final understanding to me. My task was not to convince anyone, but simply to share. Each person would have to make their own choices, find their own path. My role would be only to plant seeds, to offer a different perspective. As I absorbed all of this, I felt a change. It was as if the visions were dissolving and I was being pulled back. I initially resisted. I didn't want to leave that place of understanding and peace. But I understood that my journey wasn't over. There was a purpose for my return, a mission to fulfill. The process of returning to physical consciousness was gradual and, in a way, disorienting. After experiencing the expansion and freedom of the spiritual state, returning to the confines of a physical body was a shock. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not the peaceful silence I had experienced on the other side, but a heavy silence, punctuated only by the rhythmic beeping of machines. Slowly, I began to feel my body. It was a strange sensation, like wearing clothes that were too tight after being naked for a long time. I tried to open my eyes, but my eyelids felt too heavy. I tried to speak, but my throat was dry and sore. Gradually, I became more aware of my surroundings. The smell of antiseptic, the distant sound of voices, the rough touch of sheets against my skin. Finally, I managed to open my eyes. The light was blinding, and it took me a few moments to focus. I was in a hospital room, surrounded by medical equipment. A nurse noticed I was awake and quickly called a doctor. The following hours were a whirlwind of tests, questions, and medical explanations. I learned that I had been in a coma for 9 days. The doctors talked about irreversible brain damage and miraculous recovery. For them, my awakening on my birthday was something inexplicable. But for me, none of that mattered. My mind was filled with the experiences I had during my coma. The visions, the understandings, all seemed so vivid, so real. I tried to explain to the doctor what I had experienced, but the words felt inadequate, unable to capture the depth of what I had lived through. As the days went by, I realized that my return wasn't just physical. Something fundamental had changed in me. The worries and anxieties that once dominated my life now seemed trivial. I looked at people, doctors, nurses, visitors, and saw beyond their physical bodies. I could feel their essences, their souls. Physical recovery was a slow and sometimes frustrating process. I had to relearn basic skills: walking, talking, even recognizing my own face in the mirror. But each challenge, each moment of pain or difficulty, was a reminder that I was alive, that I had returned for a purpose. My girlfriend, Lila, was a constant presence during my recovery. She told me how she refused to give up, how she kept the faith even when the doctors said there was no hope. Her devotion touched me deeply and made me realize the power of love and faith. As I physically recovered, I struggled to integrate my spiritual experiences with everyday reality. Sometimes I found myself questioning if it had all been real or just an elaborate dream created by my oxygen-deprived brain. But then I would remember the peace, the unconditional love I had felt, and I knew in my heart that it was real. One of the hardest things was maintaining the connection to that elevated state of consciousness I had experienced. Daily life, with its distractions and constant demands, seemed to pull me back into old patterns of thought and behavior, but I was determined. I knew I had returned with a purpose, and I was committed to fulfilling it, even though I didn't fully understand what it was yet. I started meditating daily, trying to reconnect with that peace and wisdom I had experienced. As I grew stronger, so did my certainty that I needed to share my story. Not to convince anyone, but to offer hope, to show that there is more to existence than what our eyes can see. In the months following my recovery, I realized that my near-death experience had fundamentally changed the way I saw the world and my place in it. It was as if I had gained a new pair of eyes, capable of seeing beyond the surface of things. The first change I noticed was in my relationship with time. Before, I was constantly rushed, always racing against the clock, anxious about deadlines and appointments. Now I experienced each moment with a new intensity. I realized that time, as we know it on Earth, is an illusion. In reality, there is only the eternal now. My relationship with people also changed drastically. Before I tended to judge others based on appearances, social status, or material achievements. Now, I looked at each person and saw an eternal soul on a journey of learning and growth. This brought me a compassion and empathy I had never experienced before. The fear of death, which had always lingered in the back of my mind like a constant shadow, had completely disappeared. I knew, with unshakable certainty, that death was not the end, but simply a transition to another state of being. This gave me an incredible freedom to live fully, without the shackles of fear. My relationship with nature also transformed. I began to see every plant, every animal, every element, as part of a great interconnected web of life. I felt a deep reverence for the earth and all its inhabitants. I started making more conscious choices regarding the environment, feeling responsible for taking care of this planet that shelters us. Another significant change was my attitude towards life's challenges and difficulties. Before, I tended to feel victimized by circumstances, always complaining and asking, "Why me?" Now, I saw each obstacle as an opportunity for growth, each problem as an invitation to expand my consciousness. My understanding of love also deepened immeasurably. The love I experienced on the other side was so vast, so unconditional, that what I once called love seemed like a pale imitation. Now, I strove to bring a bit of that unconditional love into all my relationships. My spiritual quest, which had previously been a peripheral part of my life, became central. I began studying different spiritual traditions, not to adopt a new religion, but to find the common threads of truth that permeate all of them. Meditation, contemplation, and mindfulness practices became integral parts of my daily routine. I also noticed that I had developed heightened sensitivity. Sometimes, I could feel the emotions of the people around me or have insights about their lives that I had no way of knowing through normal means. This was initially frightening and confusing, but gradually, I learned to manage and use this sensitivity positively. My relationship with work and material success also transformed. Whereas before I was focused on climbing the corporate ladder and accumulating wealth, now I wondered how I could be of greater service to the world. I began seeking ways to align my work with my spiritual purpose. Finally, I developed a deep appreciation for life itself. Each breath, each heartbeat, each sensory experience became a source of wonder and gratitude. I had been given a second chance at life, and I was determined not to waste it. These changes didn't happen overnight. It was, and still is, a process of integration. There are days when I find myself falling back into old patterns, but now I have the tools and awareness to realign myself with this new perspective. Each day is an opportunity to live more fully, more consciously, more in tune with the truth I experienced on the other side. One of the hardest things after my near-death experience was finding a way to share what I had lived. how to translate into words experiences that transcend our everyday reality, how to explain colors to someone who has never seen them, or describe the taste of an exotic fruit to someone who has never tasted it. At first, I was reluctant to talk about my experience. I feared being ridiculed or, worse, being seen as someone who had lost their mind. After all, our society tends to dismiss experiences that cannot be measured or scientifically proven. But as time went on, I felt an increasing urge to share. It wasn't just a desire, but almost an obligation. The visions I had about the future of humanity, the understandings about the nature of reality, all seemed too important to keep secret. I started slowly, sharing with close friends and family. The reactions varied. Some were fascinated, asking endless questions about every detail. Others seemed uncomfortable, quickly changing the subject. Some openly expressed skepticism, suggesting that everything was nothing more than hallucinations caused by a lack of oxygen to the brain. These initial reactions taught me a lot about how to approach the subject. I learned to be sensitive to each person's level of openness, not to impose my experiences, but to offer them as an alternative perspective for those who were interested. Over time, I gained the courage to share my story more broadly. I started giving talks in small groups, wrote articles for local publications, and even began working on a book about my experience. One of the biggest challenges was finding a balance between honoring the depth and sacredness of what I had lived and presenting it in a way that was accessible and relevant to people in their everyday lives. I didn't want my story to be seen as something extraordinary and unattainable, but as a reminder of the spiritual potential that exists within each of us. Another challenge was dealing with the interpretations and projections people made about my experience. Many tried to fit it into their own religious or spiritual belief systems. Some saw me as a sort of guru or spiritual leader, a role I didn't feel comfortable with. I learned to be clear about what I knew and what I didn't know. I emphasized that my experience was personal and that, although I believed it contained universal truths, I did not intend for it to be seen as the only truth or the only path. One of the most rewarding parts of sharing my story was seeing how it resonated with other people's experiences. Many approached me to share their own near-death experiences or moments of spiritual insight that they had kept secret out of fear of not being understood. I realized that by speaking openly about my journey, I was creating a safe space for others to explore and express their own spiritual experiences. This showed me that there was a deep hunger for this kind of dialogue in our society. At the same time, I faced criticism and skepticism, especially from more scientific or skeptical circles. I learned not to be shaken by these negative reactions. I understood that skepticism is a natural and even necessary part of the process of discovery and paradigm shifts. Instead of reacting defensively, I tried to see these critiques as opportunities to refine my way of communicating. I sought ways to present my experience that might resonate even with those who have a more materialistic worldview. One of the most challenging things is talking about the visions of the future I had. I feel a great responsibility in sharing this information, but also concern about not causing unnecessary fear or panic. I try to emphasize that the future is not fixed, and our collective choices can shape what is to come. Another difficulty I face is staying true to the essence of my experience while navigating the normal world. It's easy to get absorbed by daily concerns and lose sight of the deeper truths I experienced. I maintain a daily practice of meditation and reflection to reconnect with that transcendent experience. As I continue to share my story, I realize that it is evolving. It is no longer just about what happened to me, but about how that experience is unfolding in my daily life, how it is shaping my choices and relationships. I begin to see that the real challenge is not just sharing the story of my near-death experience, but living in a way that embodies the truths I learned. Each interaction, each decision, becomes an opportunity to bring a bit of that light and love I experienced into the physical world. Sometimes, I feel overwhelmed by the magnitude of the task. How can I do justice to something so vast and profound? How can I translate these cosmic truths into practical actions in everyday life? But then I remember something the Akashic agents showed me. Each small act of love, Each moment of expanded awareness has an impact that extends far beyond what we can see. I don't need to change the entire world at once. I just need to do my part, one step at a time. And so, I continue my journey of sharing and living the truths I've learned. I accept that this is an ongoing process, full of challenges and lessons, but also full of joy, deep connections, and a growing sense of purpose. I know I still have much to learn and integrate. My near-death experience was not the end of the journey, but the beginning of a new phase of exploration and growth. And every day I am grateful for the opportunity to continue this journey, to keep learning, growing, and sharing. One of the biggest challenges I face after my near-death experience is integrating two seemingly distinct worlds: the spiritual world I experienced and the physical world in which I now live. It's as if I have one foot in each reality, and finding the balance between them is a daily task. In the spiritual world, I experienced a sense of unity, of interconnectedness with all that exists. There was no separation, no me and other. Everything was part of a great web of consciousness. Now, back in the physical world, I find myself once again in a separate body, dealing with the limitations and challenges of three-dimensional reality. Sometimes, I catch myself longing for that sense of expansion and freedom I experienced on the other side. The density of the physical world can feel oppressive in comparison. In those moments, I need to remind myself that I chose to come back, that there is a purpose to being here. One of the ways I try to integrate these two worlds is through the practice of mindfulness. I try to bring the expanded awareness I experienced into every moment of my day. When I eat, I try to truly savor each bite, feeling the connection to the food and all the processes that brought it to me. When I talk to someone, I try to truly be present, seeing beyond the physical appearances to the person's essence. Another way I find integration is through nature, spending time outdoors, among trees near water, or under a starry sky helps me reconnect with that sense of unity and vastness I experienced. In those moments, the barrier between the physical and spiritual seems to dissolve, and I can once again feel that interconnectedness with all that exists. One of the most challenging aspects of this integration is dealing with the daily concerns and stresses: bills to pay, deadlines to meet, conflicts to resolve. All these things can easily pull me back into old patterns of thought and behavior. It's a constant effort to remember that, on the grand scale of things, these problems are temporary and, ultimately, illusory. At the same time, I recognize that I cannot simply ignore the responsibilities of earthly life. The challenge is finding a way to meet those obligations without fully identifying with them, without allowing them to obscure the greater truth I experienced. One of the tools I use for this is perspective. Another area where I seek integration is in my relationships. The experience of unconditional love I had on the other side completely transformed my understanding of what love can be. Now, I try to bring a bit of that unconditional love into all my interactions, even the most casual or challenging ones. This is not always easy. The patterns of judgment, fear, and separation are deeply rooted in our collective psyche. But each time I manage to respond with love and understanding to a difficult situation, I feel like I am bringing a little more of that higher reality into this plane of existence. One of the most important lessons I've learned is that integration is not a final destination, but a continuous process. There is no point where I can say, okay, now I'm fully integrated. Instead, it's a constant dance between the two worlds, a balance I need to find and refine in every moment. Sometimes, I feel frustrated with the slowness of this process. I wish I could constantly maintain that elevated state of consciousness I experienced. But then I remember that this very frustration is an opportunity to practice acceptance and patience. In the end, I realize that true integration is not about trying to exactly recreate the experience I had on the other side. It's about bringing the essence of that experience, the love, the compassion, the unity, into my everyday life. It's about seeing the sacred in the mundane, the eternal in the temporal. And so, I continue my journey of integration, one day at a time, one moment at a time. I accept the challenges and frustrations as part of the process, always grateful for the opportunity to be here, to experience this dance between the physical and the spiritual. Because in the end, I realize that they are not two separate worlds, but different aspects of one vast and beautiful reality. As I continue to integrate my near-death experience into my everyday life, I become increasingly aware of a greater calling. It's not just about my own journey of growth and transformation, but about the role I can play in the collective awakening of humanity. The visions I had of Earth's future and humanity remain vivid in my mind. I clearly see the challenges we face as a species: climate change, social conflicts, the crisis of meaning and purpose that afflicts so many people. But I also see the incredible potential for transformation and evolution. I feel a growing urgency to share what I have learned, not just as an interesting story, but as a call to action. I see that we are at a critical point in our collective evolution. The choices we make now will have repercussions that extend far beyond our individual lives. One of the most important messages I feel the need to convey is the interconnectedness of all things. In the spiritual world, I directly experienced how every thought, every action, has an impact that extends throughout the web of existence. Now, back in the physical world, I see how this truth manifests at every level, from the personal to the global. I try to show people how our individual choices, what we eat, how we treat others, how we spend our time and energy, have a much greater impact than we may realize. Every act of kindness, every moment of expanded awareness, creates ripples that spread far beyond ourselves. At the same time, I am careful not to fall into the trap of seeing myself as a savior or a guru. I constantly remind myself that each person has their own journey, their own path to awakening. My role is not to dictate absolute truths, but to offer a different perspective, to plant seeds of possibility. One of the ways I try to do this is by example. I strive to live in a way that reflects the truths I have learned, practicing compassion, seeking sustainability, cultivating awareness in every moment. It's not always easy, and I often fail, but each effort is an opportunity for learning and growth. I also seek ways to create spaces for others to explore their own spiritual experiences. I organize meditation groups, facilitate workshops on expanded awareness, and simply make myself available to listen when people want to share their own transcendent experiences. One of the most powerful things I learned in my near-death experience was the power of unconditional love. Now, I see that bringing more of that love into the world is one of the deepest forms of service I can offer. This doesn't mean ignoring problems or injustices, but addressing them with compassion and understanding, seeing beyond appearances to the divine essence in each being. As I share my story and the lessons I have learned, I realize that the awakening I am calling for is not something abstract or distant. It is something that can happen here and now, in each moment of expanded awareness, in each act of kindness, in each choice aligned with the greater good. I see that the call to awaken is not just for a few chosen ones, but for all of humanity. Each of us has a role to play in this great transformation. Some may be visible leaders, others may work quietly behind the scenes, but every contribution is equally valuable and necessary. Sometimes, the magnitude of this call overwhelms me. How can I, just one person, make a significant difference in the face of such immense challenges? But then I remember what I saw on the other side, that every act of love, every moment of expanded awareness, has a far greater impact than we can perceive with our limited senses. And so, I continue my journey, responding to the call to awaken in the best way I can. I know I don't have all the answers, that I still have much to learn and grow. But I also know that every step on this journey is valuable, that every effort to bring more light and love into the world makes a difference. I invite every person I meet to join me on this journey of awakening, not to follow me, but to find their own path, to discover their own inner truth. For I believe that this is how the great transformation will happen, not through a single dramatic event, but through the gradual awakening of millions of hearts and minds. And so, I move forward, grateful for the second chance I received, committed to honoring the gift of life by doing my part to elevate the consciousness of humanity. It is a challenging journey, sometimes frightening, but always deeply rewarding. And every day, I am reminded of the deepest truth I learned in my near-death experience, that in the end, everything is love, everything is one. If you enjoyed this beautiful spiritual testimony, leave a like, comment your thoughts, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to hit the notification bell to watch every new video and help us spread this message to as many people as possible. See you next time.